What if a poor, nearsighted kid who stank at baseball was destined to destroy an empire? I'm Felix. Welcome to Felix Feel World. Reagan had a strong desire to perform deep down. He was born for it. Back then, the Communist Party and the Nazis were seen as the same thing in America. Both were extreme evil, and they had to be wiped out fast. Reagan's grudge against communism kept growing. Destroying communism became one of his life goals. Reagan first met Gorbachev from January 19 to 21, 1985. That was Reagan's second term as president. He'd just won re-election 2 months earlier. Reagan went on to become the most popular president in American history. Besides his own hard work, Gorbachev walking right into his hands had a lot to do with it. His whole life was full of legends. Reagan was born in February, 1911 inches, Tampico. Before he turned 9, his family kept moving. They lived in Chicago, Galesburg, and Monmouth, and finally settled in Dixon, a small town of only 10,000 people. The reason his family moved around so much was his troublesome dad. His father was an alcoholic with no real job. Only after settling in Dixon did he get steady work selling shoes. Every holiday he'd get drunk, and in the middle of winter he'd often pass out right in front of the house. Every time, the family had to drag him inside so he wouldn't freeze to death. Because they were poor, Reagan's mom often patched up clothes from his older brother Neil and passed them down to Reagan. To have food on the table, she'd regularly send Reagan to the town butcher to ask for some animal organs, saying they were for the family cat. But really, the family would stew those organs with oatmeal and eat it all. Reagan was nearsighted as a kid. He always had a Dutch boy haircut, so everyone called him Dutchie. Because they moved so much, he went to 4 different elementary schools in 4 years. He didn't have any steady friends to play with. As a kid, he loved baseball, but he was terrible at it. He'd strike out all the time. His awful skills often shocked the other kids. So he was pretty insecure when he was young. But his mom, Nell, often put on amateur shows at the Dixon church. She talked both her sons into going on stage. That's how Reagan got tricked and dragged onto the stage for the first time by his own mother. He said he couldn't even remember what he recited. But the people in the audience laughed and laughed. He really enjoyed that happy laughter. It motivated him a lot. Around that same year, Reagan first went on stage. His lifelong enemy, the Soviet Union, was founded. Reagan's dad, Jack, wasn't totally a scumbag. He had some good qualities. For example, Jack was great at telling stories. Reagan said he had a sharp, biting sense of humor. Under his father's influence over many years, Reagan learned how to tell stories in public. That skill had a huge impact on his future campaigns. In middle school, Reagan tried drama at Dixon High School. He picked up a little stage experience, but at that point, he didn't have a clear direction in life. By his teens, Reagan had grown into a good-looking local guy. His proudest thing at the time was working as a lifeguard at Lowell Park. He shamelessly claimed that over those summers, he saved 77 people from drowning. But years later, when a reporter went back to Dixon to interview people, most of the town denied it. They felt they hadn't actually been drowning. The good-looking kid just liked showing off in public. It's understandable everyone goes through that cringy phase when they're young. Because he often went to the local church with his mom, Reagan fell for the pastor's daughter, Margaret. After Margaret finished high school, she decided to go to Eureka College, 100 miles south of Dixon. It was a church-affiliated college. Several of Margaret's older sisters had gone there. Seeing that his crush was about to leave, Reagan threw a fit and insisted on going too. His mom was a devout Protestant. Christianity has 3 major branches: Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox. Reagan's dad and brother were Catholic. Reagan and his mom were Protestant. His mom was happy he wanted to go to a church school, so she let him. Even though college tuition in America wasn't as crazy expensive back then as it is today, Reagan's family was poor. They couldn't afford to pay for his schooling. So Reagan used the skills he learned from years of giving speeches on stage. He talked his way into getting some scholarships, found a part-time job, and added the money he'd saved as a lifeguard. Finally, he scraped together enough for tuition. Another reason he chose that school was because it was tiny. Only 250 students, and most of them were girls. That way, he had a chance to join the football team. Football is America's #1 sport. It's flashy to play on the field. Girls' eyes would light up when they saw football players. Reagan still craved attention. Reagan had a strong desire to perform deep down. He was born for it. But the football coach looked down on him because he was nearsighted. What good is a guy who can't see anything? The only reason Reagan made the team was that the school was so small they needed bodies. He was a benchwarmer who would never get to play. Reagan was bored out of his mind. He'd often grab a broken broomstick and pretend it was a microphone, commentating on the games. As he talked, he actually figured out formations and strategies. His theoretical knowledge improved. But the coach still looked down on him, saying he was all talk. Reagan's college life was even worse than Forrest Gump's. His grades were totally average. He was a C student at best. He wasn't good at sports either. It looked like his only path forward was to rely on his looks. Plus, he went to a small school. If you had told him back then he'd become president of the United States, even he wouldn't have believed it. Because he couldn't make it in sports, Reagan, who already had some acting skills, decided from then on that he wanted to become an actor. In 1932, when Reagan graduated from college, Gorbachev, who would one day join him in destroying the Soviet Union, was just 1 year old. He was still learning to walk on a Soviet farm. The Great Depression in America wasn't over yet. Reagan couldn't find a job, so he went back to being a lifeguard for 2 months. To break into the entertainment industry, Reagan decided to start as a sports announcer. He went to different cities applying for announcing jobs. He failed 4 or 5 times in a row. Finally, when he applied at Walk Radio, the program director gave him a chance to do an audition. He had to imagine a game and describe a football match into the microphone. Reagan remembered a classic comeback game from his college team. He hadn't eaten the pork himself, but he'd at least seen a pig run. He'd had experience using a broom as a microphone. He quickly got into the commentary, making the game sound thrilling. The director was really pleased with his commentary. He paid him $10 per game and had him do 4 games. A few months later, WOC officially hired him as an announcer in Davenport. Later, he moved to Des Moines. That was Reagan's first real job. Reagan worked at the radio station for 4 years. But during those 4 years, he never really focused on the job. He was always looking for a chance to break into Hollywood as an actor. Once, a game he was supposed to announce in Southern California was canceled because of a storm. Reagan rushed to Los Angeles and found his former colleague Joy. He treated him to barbecue, hoping Joy would introduce him to some acting work in Hollywood. Joy said, "If you take off your glasses, you might have a chance." He sent Reagan to audition with an agent named Bill. Reagan's luck started there. His voice was exactly like an actor from Warner Brothers, who had just passed away. The company people still missed him. Because of that, Reagan passed the audition and got a 7-year contract with Warner Brothers at $200 a week. He went from an average white-collar worker straight to a golden-collar level. So there's nothing a barbecue can't solve. If it can, then 2 barbecues. In May 1937, 26-year-old Reagan drove a beat-up car with all his belongings to Los Angeles and started his acting career. That year, Gorbachev was only 6, still playing in the mud on a Soviet farm. After Reagan went to Hollywood, his crush Margaret went to work in France. After that, they never crossed paths again. Margaret married a staff member at the American Embassy. Reagan, in 1940, at age 29, married actress Wyman, who was 6 years younger. Reagan finally got the life he'd always dreamed of. In his early days, Reagan made a name for himself in gangster and crime films. When he was filming Times the King's Row, he was on a fast rise in his career. Then Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Reagan had to report for duty at Fort Mason in April 1942. Because he was nearsighted, he didn't go to the front lines. He was stationed in San Francisco. The military also needed to make propaganda films to boost morale. They had a second-tier Hollywood star right there, so why not use him? Reagan went on to make patriotic films like Times the Gunner's Mate, Times and Times Target Tokyo. At the time, he earned $300 a month in the Army, and Warner Brothers was still paying him $3,500 a week. When he came back from the military in 1945, at least a few million Americans had seen his propaganda films. Reagan became a man with both fame and fortune. After World War II ended, the world entered the US-Soviet rivalry. At that time, nobody knew which system was better for development. Everyone was pretty confused. A lot of people in America believed in communism. There were about 100,000 Communist Party members. At a rally, Reagan expressed his political views for the first time. He said, "Once I find evidence that communism is a threat, endangering what we believe in and support, then I will attack communism as harshly as I attacked fascism." In the summer of 1946, Reagan and James, Franklin Roosevelt's eldest son, attended a meeting of the Hollywood Independent Citizens Committee, called Black Caps. James said this organization was becoming a front for communists. Everyone needed to issue a statement saying they opposed communism. But some well-respected people in the committee stood up and supported the Soviet Union. A famous musician offered to recite the Soviet Constitution on the spot, claiming it was superior to the US Constitution. A well-known screenwriter even said that if the US and the Soviet Union went to war, he would side with the Soviets. Reagan and James couldn't believe so many people in Hollywood believed in communism. They were completely stunned. The two of them got shouted down and kicked out of the meeting. Probably from around that time, Reagan's feud with communism began. Let me explain here. People's views on things change over time. Communism used to be purely theoretical. It only started being put into practice with Lenin. The Soviet Union's first 5-year plan produced a huge leap in productivity, and it also seemed very righteous. During the Spanish Civil War against fascism, communists acted noble and brave. At that time, communists had a good reputation. A group of people in America also thought communism was a viable path. During the Great Depression in the 1930s, this view reached its peak. After the US and the Soviet Union teamed up to kill Hitler, they realized they were too different to stay partners. They each went home to clean up their own countries. Communism in America gradually faded. The more history I read, the more I understand that many truths change with the times. That's why I often say don't blindly believe any viewpoint, not even mine. Base your understanding on facts and keep updating your knowledge. In 1943, Reagan was already dealing with the FBI. Once at a Hollywood cocktail party, He beat up a man who publicly insulted Jews. The FBI came to him and said, "Bro, you're really loyal. How about helping us find the Nazis and communists in Hollywood? We'll take care of them." Back then, the Communist Party and the Nazis were seen as the same thing in America. Both were extreme evil, and they had to be wiped out fast. In 1947, Hollywood also had its own purge movement. In September, they held a massive hearing. Reagan was called in to testify about the spread of communism in the film industry. The hearing sent 10 pro-communist Hollywood screenwriters, directors, and others to prison and blacklisted them. After they got out of jail, nobody dared to hire them. These people had to write scripts anonymously. One of them was Trumbo, who wrote Times Roman Holiday. These 10 were later called the Hollywood 10. The year after the purge, Reagan and Wyman got divorced. According to a 2015 Reagan biography published in the US, it revealed that Reagan had slept with many actresses back then. The two of them had an open marriage. Warner Brothers even deliberately arranged for various actresses to date him to boost his exposure. According to the book, Reagan had flings with Lana Turner, Doris Day, and Marilyn Monroe. He had affairs with at least 50 actresses. Wyman wasn't idle either, so their marriage was unstable from the start. A year after being kicked out of the Black Caps meeting, Reagan became president of the Screen Actors Guild. By then, his feelings were hurt, so he actively cooperated with the FBI to find communists in Hollywood. In 1952, Reagan remarried. In 1953, the FBI officially assigned him the codename T-10. Reagan handed over lists of suspected communists to the FBI. Of course, some of it was personal. Some of those people had grudges with Reagan. The guy with the thick eyebrows and big eyes was actually snitching. At one investigative meeting, Reagan publicly said he hated and loathed communist ideology. Reagan's grudge against communism kept growing. Destroying communism became one of his life goals. That year, Gorbachev was 22, still wearing his patched pants and wandering around Moscow University. He had no idea that far away in America, a man 20 years older was waiting for him. Together, they would destroy the Soviet Union, a country they either hated or were disappointed in. Reagan's early grudges in Hollywood helped fuel his lifelong crusade against communism, proving how personal history can shape world events. If you like this, hit subscribe for more stories like this.